I've invited a few of my students here this afternoon to ask me some questions of their choice. I thought that the answers to these questions would be of interest to those of you viewing at home. Susan?
Well, for recording purposes, how much warm-up do you think is required?
Well, I like a 20-minute warm-up, although usually 15 minutes is enough. But I like that feeling of my vocal cords being really warmed up and ready to sing. Also, I feel that it's best to warm up the voice about an hour before any performance, whether it be in a recording studio or live on stage. I like to let the vocal cords rest just before singing. So warm up about an hour before, then rest, and then get out there and sing your heart out. Jim?
Pamela, I'd like you to talk to us about nervousness before and during a performance.
That's a really good question and deserves a lot more time than we actually have here today to answer. But my quick response to that has to do with breathing. Taking in a really deep breath and letting it out in a really relaxed manner will definitely help to center you. You can do this just before you go out on stage, in front of a recording microphone, or even in the middle of songs when you're actually on stage. Also, I like to use getting into the lyrics of songs as a way of centering myself. When I'm looking out at the audience, thinking about them, worrying about how they're thinking about me, then I'm really distracted from the music. But when I'm thinking about the meaning of the lyrics, then I'm really centered inside the song, and that helps to ground me and keep me from being nervous. Erica?
Pamela, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about microphone technique.
Yes, I was hoping that somebody would ask that question, actually, and I brought a microphone to demonstrate my one-sentence lecture on microphone technique, which is stay in front of the microphone. I'm sure you've all been to people's weddings or high school graduations where people are in front of a microphone and they're sort of like wandering off to the side like this. The microphone stays in one place, but they're moving all over the place. And then the sound moves all over the place. So the basic idea is if the mic is on a mic stand, then you have to stay in front of the mic stand and be in front of the mic. If you're hand holding the mic, as I am, then you have a lot of freedom to move around, and wherever you move, you can look up, you can look down. However you move, you can take the mic with me. Notice how the microphone is always equidistant from my mouth. Now, if I was going to punch a really high, loud, hard upper chest register note, then I'd probably back off somewhat from the mic. And if I was going to sing a low, sultry, deep tone, then I'd lean into the mic. You can see by the lipstick on my microphone that I sing a lot of low, sultry, deep tones. Also, here's some really good advice. Be really careful not to aim the microphone into any nearby speakers. That's how you get radical feedback, and it hurts everybody's ears. Keep the microphone facing you and stand in front of it. Diana.
Yes, I'd like to know what the effects of alcohol are on your vocal cords.
Well, alcohol generally numbs the vocal cords, so that's the immediate reaction. And since I personally like to be in touch with my musical instrument, I like to have the full feeling there. Your voice will talk to you when you can feel it. So if you're pushing too hard, your voice will let you know, and then you can cut back so that you don't hurt yourself. If you're under the influence of alcohol, then the tendency might be to push a little bit harder than you're aware of. You can wake up the next day and have a really raspy voice and wish that you hadn't done that the night before. The overall effects of alcohol are generally considered to be debilitating, and whatever is debilitating to the general nervous system is going to be debilitating to the voice. So although I don't like to get in the way of people's lifestyle, I generally recommend that you don't drink, especially in conjunction with singing. Bobby.
Yeah, does posture really affect one's vocal performance?
To a certain degree. I've seen a lot of exception to this. Earlier in this videotape, I recommended to the viewing audience that they not sing with their head back like this or dip down like this. And yet when I saw Whitney Houston in concert, she sang all of her high notes with her head thrown completely back to the sky. So different people's physiology will affect the impression made on the vocal cords. But basically, you want to keep your spine and your chest plate relaxed, but not collapsed. Because you don't want to put any pressure on the vocal cords, and you don't want to put any pressure on the breathing apparatus. So I recommend a nice stance, as if you were standing against a wall. And when you're moving around a lot on stage, that tends to get loosened up in the context of performance. But you can sort of center yourself around that. Definitely avoid slumping.
Can you talk about sitting, maybe?
Sitting. So there are some guitar players, for instance,
Yeah.
especially acoustic musicians, who like to sit and play the guitar. It makes it a lot harder to breathe that way. So you just have to be more conscious about taking in really good, solid, deep inhales. And definitely, you don't want to hunch over your guitar. Female vocalists sometimes, especially in a cabaret setting, will like to sit, sit on a bar stool, get off those high heels for a few minutes. So it's okay to sit, but you will notice a difference when you want to go for the really challenging notes. You will notice a difference in breath support if you're really paying close attention. So I frequently use something like a bar stool when I sing in nightclubs because I like to give some relief to my feet. I like to wear high heels when I sing, and 4 hours of standing in high heels can really be aggravating. So I like to give myself some relief by sitting occasionally. But when I know I'm going to sing one of those songs that really takes my full vocal energy, I grab the microphone and stand up. Stephen.
Yes, there's a lot of different styles of singing. There's like Broadway, classical, pop, rock, and
Jazz, country.
jazz, everything. And so if someone is, say, trained in Broadway singing, and it's like mainly proper or classical, what is the aphorism that's street sound? I mean, do they have to get a note or two to get that sound, or what?
That's a really interesting question. Let me back up a little bit to what you were describing as different ways of training.
Okay.
So there definitely is classical technique, and it's specifically designed for classical singing. And there definitely is contemporary technique, and that's exactly the kind of technique that I taught earlier on this videotape. And contemporary technique is specifically designed for the contemporary vocalist. Broadway rides the fence. Broadway is a little bit of crossover between classical and contemporary singing, and therefore classical and contemporary technique can both be applied to the Broadway stage. My experience with a lot of my students who have been classically trained is that it doesn't translate really smoothly to contemporary, or especially what you're calling street sound singing. Classical technique tends to be very protective of the voice, and that's really good. But when you're going out there and singing rock and roll, you're giving it all away, and you can't really afford that kind of delicate protection that classical technique offers. And this is why about 30 years ago, contemporary technique was designed to help really beef up power in the vocal cords for contemporary singers that were going to go out there and blast. And that classical technique didn't quite cross over for it. To get that tougher sound, I suggest learning a really good, strong, contemporary style of technique that beefs up the power in the vocal cords so you can push beyond the normal limits without hurting yourself.
Yeah, because I noticed that some singers like Barbra Streisand, Whitney Houston, they have they can float, their voice floats, but they can really get some chutzpah into it, so to speak, you know what I mean?
Well, those are extraordinary singers, and it's not to say that we can't also lift ourselves up to their level of expertise. My understanding is that although she doesn't tend to admit it, that Streisand has been trained in both classical and contemporary technique. I hear it in her voice.
Yeah.
I really don't know Whitney Houston's background other than church, but those women both have paid really close attention to making really smooth crossovers between the registers of full voice and falsetto, where they're not punching so hard in full voice that then when they flip into falsetto there's really an obvious break. Instead, they go smoothly up into their upper register, almost at speech level, what we might call speech level singing, rather than punching to the max. And so they make a much easier transition into falsetto as a result. So smooth, as a matter of fact, that most of us don't really know when those transitions are being made. I have to listen really closely to Streisand to tell when she's shifting registers.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Erica?
I was wondering about the sort of a lifespan of a voice. You know, like ballerinas and, you know, dancers and stuff have a career sort of time and peaking and all that stuff. And I was just wondering about how the voice and singers, you know, how that works with singers and aging and, you know, the maturity of a voice and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I was just talking to Stephen about this the other day at his lesson. My experience of the human voice is that it just gets better with age. Muscles develop and they get stronger with use, and the aging process is a using process. And I would say that Ella Fitzgerald is one of the exquisite examples of how well a voice can hold up. Again, a lot of this gets back to how we take care of the rest of our body, not just the voice. If we're abusing ourselves physically, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then the voice is going to wear out a lot sooner, just like the rest of the body is going to wear out a lot sooner. There is a point, and I think it varies from individual to individual, where the muscles of the vocal cords will start to break down somewhat. And my experience from listening to other singers is that this takes place in the mid-60s. So the voice has a nice long time span. And Ella Fitzgerald is in her 70s right now, and she's cranking. So there's some other really great singers out there, senior citizens, that sing their little rears off. Diana.
Yes. Does developing your ear have a lot to do with expanding your vocal range?
Actually, those are two completely separate issues. Developing your vocal range is specifically done with good vocal exercise that strengthens the vocal cords and also gives the vocal cords the ability to relax so that they can handle the faster and the slower vibrations. Developing your ear is something that can be taken from a couple of different angles. The first angle specifically has to do with refined listening. For instance, sometimes when my students are doing their vocal exercises with me and I'm accompanying them on the piano, their pitch will tend to wander off. And that's a sure sign to me that they're not listening to both the piano and themselves simultaneously. So the ability to listen to the instruments that are accompanying you as well as yourself simultaneously is one aspect of refined listening. Also, another aspect of refined listening is being able to pay attention specifically to the pitch of the instruments that are accompanying you so that you fall into that pocket and are singing in tune. Another attribute of developing an ear is a more complex subject which has to do with music theory, where you literally can learn to recognize musical intervals simply when they're played. I don't have an instrument here today where I can do such a demonstration, but for instance, if I had a piano or a guitar where I could play some intervals for you of thirds, fourths, fifths, and if I didn't tell you what those were, but you had a developed enough ear to be able to just know that, or I could play a series of chords and you might not know what key I was in, but you'd know the color of those chords, like whether it was a dominant chord or a 9 or a major 7. You'd be able to tell the names of those chords, the texture, the color of them, simply by that kind of listening. That's another kind of ear development that's usually learned through music theory training and specific ear training classes. I usually recommend that if you want ear training, that you go to your local community college. They have wonderful, very inexpensive ear training courses at local community colleges. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. You asked really interesting and informative questions, and I'm sure that the viewing audience at home also appreciates the thoughtfulness that you put into asking those questions today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd also like to thank the viewing audience at home for being here with me, and I wish you all good singing.